Until I moved to New Orleans for college, I lived in a small town in Louisiana called Franklinton. We moved there when I was 3. As my mom used to say, if Louisiana was a boot, we lived in the toe. It was my dad's hometown, and my parents decided it would be mine as well. To enter the main part of town, one would have to cross the Bogachita River Bridge. Very predictably, the Bogachita River Bridge crosses the Bogachita River. You can't begin to imagine some of the trouble I got into around that river. I nearly drowned in it at least once. Small, swampy ponds right off the river would writhe with snakes, and the mosquitoes had anger management issues. As a matter of slight exaggeration, most bugs in southern Louisiana are the size of cell phones. Like in Australia and undoubtedly Florida, the majority of the wildlife in southern Louisiana wants to kill you and makes attempts on your life fairly often. In addition to the weaponized wildlife, the Bogachita River can flood quite dramatically. I remember taking the bus to school during an impressive flood and seeing a house floating by with a cow on the porch. I always wondered what happened to that cow. With all the other hazards in and around the Bogachita, I was always shocked it didn't have its own river monster. I was an avid fan of Leonard Nimoy's In Search Of and had some fleeting understanding of cryptids because of it. Add my love of horror movies, and I was practically an expert on this stuff as a kid, or at least as far as I was concerned at the time. The way I saw it, there were already numerous dangerous animals living there, and it flooded often enough to wash out some of our dangerous animals and wash in a few new ones. But, sadly for me, I had to make do with all the regular dangers of the Bogachita, as nothing with a more atomic-age sci-fi quality ever presented itself. Moving to Ohio, I discovered the sheer number of cryptid activities on par with West Virginia. River monsters, Sasquatches, even some melonhead children. We'll get to those creepy kids in another episode. In fact, the Ohio River, unlike the Bogachita, does have its own river monster. It's commonly referred to as the Green Claw Beast, but I prefer the moniker the Green Claw Monster of the Ohio River. It's just snazzier. 2 women, Naomi Johnson and Louise Lamble, in an effort to stifle the Evansville, Indiana heat, took the 3 Johnson children and hit the Ohio River for a refreshing swim. At some point during their excursion, Naomi found herself in the water, floating peacefully in a tube, lazily paddling in circles. Louise was sunning herself on the beach while the children played in the sand. It was a simply idyllic way to pass a hot afternoon, at least until something reached out of the water and grabbed Naomi by the knee and pulled her in. She struggled to free herself and returned to the surface for air. When she managed that, she screamed, and the mysterious creature was frightened off. Versions of the story suggest it tried one more time to drag Naomi down before being frightened off. Other versions of the story suggest Naomi floundered in the water for longer, trying desperately to return to the inner tube. But that version would depend on Naomi's friend Louise watching quietly from the riverbank while she struggled and screamed. Maybe they weren't close friends.
That one doesn't seem as far-fetched, knowing that the Ohio River is 100% fucked up.
Well,
I swum in that river, and it's not great.
And I mean, have you ever just swimming through like a pile of debris that just wraps around you?
You wish it was debris in the Ohio River. It's more like straight-up chemicals and oil and nuclear waste.
It's the story to me. It's another one that feels a lot like Flatwoods. It's very different than your typical cryptid story. It feels way more like a Scooby-Doo monster than something that could be feasibly an undiscovered thing. Like if you've ever gone swimming in one of those kind of rivers, it's full of green algae covered sticks and things like that. It just feels like somebody stepped on a stick and the stick came out of the water and it looked hairy and green and they freaked out, and now we have this amazing myth that's grown out of that.
First off, there's a plethora of these stories all kind of surrounding the Ohio River and its tributaries. So you can
and ancient stories too, Native Americans. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And so I guess again, like, relating that back to Bigfoot, like that's kind of, what, maybe they're related because people heard these stories and then they started seeing them, and that's what, created these encounters, or there is some kind of unknown creature that lives in the Ohio River and around the Ohio River, because it's not like we see these things in just Ohio. There's reports of them in Indiana and Kentucky as well. And, because it follows the river, they're all kind of within, I forget what I said in the episode that we did on that, but it was like 100 miles of each other. All of these sightings have occurred.
And all these tributaries are all tributaries of the Ohio River. Yeah.
Some believers suggest it's a similar creature to the Thetis Lake Monster. The Thetis Lake Monster was allegedly spotted by 2 teen boys in Victoria, British Columbia. This conclusion is short-sighted, as the 2 aforementioned boys admitted to making the Thetis Lake Monster up. Others feel it may be another example of a cryptid a bit closer to home, the Loveland Frog Monster. A local businessman claimed to have seen a group of frog monsters on a darkened road or bridge, depending on the version you hear. One seemed to be brandishing a magic wand of some kind, from which he fired a spectacular display of sparks, frightening the witness away. There was also an incident in 1972 where a Loveland police officer by the name of Ray Shockey saw a frog monster climbing over a guardrail to get to the body of water underneath. 2 weeks later, another officer, Mark Matthews, not surprisingly, shot it. He threw the body in his trunk to show it to Shockey, and then concluded it was an iguana that had lost its tail. Another sighting by some Pokemon Go fanatics in 2016 also turned into disappointment. This time, it was some kid in a homemade frog costume. Small towns usually equal bored kids.
Like a swamp creature, a frog man. It's a man that's a frog. It's a frog man.
This is some shit that, like, my grandfather would have told me. Like, yeah, you go down by the lake there, big paw come out and get you. Like, you sure? Like,
yeah.
Like, there's.
I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if things were mutating in our rivers, but I don't know about a whole frog man with a big green claw.
I read about that. In fact, I think it was tracked near the house I grew up in. So that's what caught my attention, but it seemed like kind of bullshit. So.
I think that's some hallucinogens. I mean, yeah, I don't know if I really go for that one in this region. Yeah, it kind of seems like some frog prints stuff. Like the frog prints. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know about that guy. It'd be pretty sweet though.
So where does that lead us? Does the green-clawed beast exist? Does the Loveland Frog Monster? For that matter, is there even the potential for a river monster to exist?
Absolutely. I growing up in the South with alligators or whatever, there are things that live underneath the water that we don't know about. There's a monster is a big scary thing, and there's tons of those in our rivers,
I think river monster is more believable than the lake monster. I mean, unless it's a really big lake.
Yeah.
It could be a really big lake.
Yeah.
But again, I think river, because it's got it's moving more. I think that's more believable. I mean, there's scary shit in the ocean that we haven't discovered yet.
The thing with this is that there are a lot of physical factors that determine what creatures can live in those types of bodies of water, right? The problem with lakes is that tends to be very stagnant. They don't change a lot. So your nutrient sources are kind of limited in the sense that the larger the animal is, the more food they're going to have to eat, unless we're dealing with a huge, huge lake. It's going to be hard to feed a creature that big. Right. So the idea of these smaller, vernal or other pools supporting life of that size that they tend to think, we tend to think of when we think of monsters, that I don't buy, because I just don't think the environmental conditions support that. However, unusual features or possibly the influence of some type of mutagen, or we're looking at, some life form that is bigger than average but not monstrously large. Oh, absolutely. All kinds of weird shit happens all the time.
So just how big of a creature could the Ohio River sustain? Is there any point between Evansville, Indiana, and anywhere in Ohio and beyond where there's enough insect life to sustain something as large as a Loveland Frog Monster? Frog monsters or not, there are plenty of dangerous animals that live in the river. So just remember, if you walk into their house acting like an ass, you might have yours handed to you. Do you have questions, comments, additional information on the subject of this episode? Would you like to suggest an idea for an episode? Email me at paintingtheunexplained@gmail.com. If you're enjoying Painting the Unexplained, feel free to like the video, subscribe, and share the video with people to either amuse or annoy them. To support Painting the Unexplained, visit our Patreon page. And to keep up with Painting the Unexplained, stop by paintingtheunexplained.com.